Gardy low! Gardy low! Watch out for the water. That's what you would shout when you're emptying your chamber pot. Some people reckon that's where we got the word loo from. Low, loo.
But where did our loos come from? Most people think they were invented by the infamous Thomas Crapper, but he was only one of many who contributed to the evolution of the lavatory. So why has his name stuck?
Well, we always like to associate one individual with each sort of major invention, I suppose. But it's not true to say that he invented the loo, and no one man did actually invent the loo. It developed over many years. But Mr. Crapper, I suppose, promoted it better than anyone else.
Now this seat takes me right back to my childhood on the Pennines with the old outside toilet. That's what it is, isn't it?
This is the most basic type of loo you can get, really, the privy. A little house at the bottom of the garden, a basic board with perhaps another board in front of it to cover it up, and underneath nothing more than a pit.
And what about this instrument of torture you've got there then? What does that do?
Well, this is an original long-handled ladle for removing the contents of the pit. It was someone's unfortunate job, usually father's, I suppose, to every 6 to 12 months or whenever it was filled up.
Oh, as often as that?
Oh, yes. And then dig a big hole in an unused part of the garden and bury it all.
It's a giant pooper scooper, really.
It certainly is.
This valve lavatory was introduced in the late 1700s.
Now tell me about this one then. This is a riot of technology, isn't it?
It certainly is, and it's a valve closet. And although it looks very strange to have all this exposed stuff, it would be panelled in. You'd have a lovely piece of polished wood along the front there, polished wood on top, with holes in it to expose that handle and the bowl here. And it works on a valve principle in that when you pull the handle up, inside the bottom of the loo drops away. The water and all its contents whoosh down the plug hole. At the same time, it's opened this cold water valve. It would start the whole thing working, and then this air chamber on the side would let the handle return slowly back to rest, cutting off the water and closing off the bottom of the loo again.
I mean, that seems quite sophisticated, and it seems like we've got the germ of the modern toilet there, but it's not the same principle as we're familiar with today, is it?
It isn't, no. In fact, it's overcomplicated. It's a wonderful piece of engineering, but it's desperately over-engineered and overcomplicated, and that's really why they finally went out, because they were too expensive to make and too expensive to maintain.
But they were made right up until the Second World War.
Because the aristocracy preferred them. They had got used to these valve closets, and they considered the Victorian ideal of the exposed, decorated loo pan, or the loo pan like we have today, dreadfully middle class. It was nouveau riche at the time to have an exposed pan, so the aristocracy continued with these. And still, in stately homes up and down the country, there are these wonderful valve closets, and Buckingham Palace, indeed, has a selection of them as well. The trap, of course, was...
By the middle of the 19th century, the potters of Stafford had worked out how to make a lavatory entirely in porcelain.
That's the shape, isn't it?
Yes.
That does say loo, doesn't it? That says toilet.
It certainly does. That's correctly called the trap. Lots of people call them the U-bend. But full of water, and it's always full of water, and it stops the sewer gases from coming up into the room.
Now that's a great little solution, really, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I mean, this later developed into the loo as we know it today.
Soon the pan was in one piece and no longer hidden behind panelling. One beautifully patterned model followed another.
So how did they test new models?
They would have a variety of ways of testing them. The main thing was to flush away as much bits and pieces they could find. Of course, they couldn't test it with the real thing. So this one, for example, was very famous. It won an award at the 1884 Health Exhibition for successfully flushing away no fewer than 10 small apples, a large flat sponge, a load of plumber's smudge, whatever that was, coated all over the inside of the barrel. Yeah. And the whole lot was flushed away in one go.
And it wasn't just the lavatories that were changing. Until Thomas Crapper, salesmen had relied on brochures and perfect miniatures to sell their wares. But all that changed in the late 1800s.
Thomas Crapper may not have invented the loo, but he did invent the bathroom showroom, and that did away with the need for little sales miniatures like this. What he did was rip the sash windows out of his Chelsea shop, put in big plate glass windows, and stack the windows with full-sized lavatories. And think of the shock value that made ladies faint in the streets. After all, this was the 1870s, and it offended Victorian sensibilities, and maybe Thomas Crapper brought the water closet out of the closet.